Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever had to pretend everything was perfect when your world was actually a little bit of a mess? Today, we are diving into a story about Julian. He's a talented freelancer who is finally getting his big break with a high-paying client. The only problem, he can't afford Wi-Fi at home, and his life-changing business meeting is on Zoom in just 2 hours. To survive, he has to turn the noisy, unpredictable public library into his executive office and try to hide the chaos from his client. As you listen to Julian's struggle today, you're going to learn some great natural English vocabulary for daily life, business, and dealing with stressful situations. Let's get started. Julian's eyes stared at the blank screen of his phone. No connection. He sighed and glanced at the stack of unpaid bills on his small kitchen table. The topmost letter, printed in aggressive red ink, was from his internet provider. Service suspended. As an aspiring freelance web developer, losing Wi-Fi was like losing oxygen. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a rare 4G signal. An email notification popped up. Julian opened it, and his heart skipped a beat. It was from Victoria Vance, the creative director of a massive design agency. He had sent her his portfolio last week, never expecting a reply. The email read, "Zoom pitch, 1 p.m. today. Hi, Julian. I love your style. Let's do a quick video call at 1 o'clock today to discuss our upcoming project. If the fit is right, we can sign the contract this afternoon." Julian checked his watch. It was 11:15 a.m. He had less than 2 hours. This contract was worth enough money to pay his rent for 3 months and turn his internet back on. But how could he do a professional video pitch with zero home Wi-Fi? The library, Julian whispered to himself. The local community library was only 4 blocks away, and it had free public Wi-Fi. It wasn't perfect. It was often noisy, crowded, and slow, but it was his only chance. He grabbed his laptop, threw his charger into his backpack, and ran out the door. He had to build a temporary executive office in the middle of a public library, and he had to do it now. Julian burst through the heavy glass doors of the public library, panting and wiping sweat from his forehead. He had exactly 90 minutes before the big meeting. His first destination was the 3rd floor, a designated silent zone with cozy, isolated study cubicles. But as he reached the top of the stairs, his heart sank. Every single quiet booth was occupied by college students studying for midterm exams. Panicking, Julian hurried back down to the 2nd floor. The only empty spot left in the entire building was desk 4B. It was a wooden table located in a high-traffic area right next to the children's section and a giant, noisy office printer. To make matters worse, a bright, multicolored banner reading "Toddler Story Time" hung just 3 feet behind his chair. "I have to make this work," Julian muttered, sitting down and opening his laptop. He turned on his front-facing camera to check the video angle. If he sat perfectly straight and leaned slightly to the left, the camera only captured a small section of blank, beige wall. But if he moved even 2 inches to the right, the giant sparkling letters of Toddler appeared right next to his head. He spent the next 20 minutes practicing his posture, trying to look like a relaxed, successful professional while sitting as stiffly as a statue. He connected to the free public library Wi-Fi, holding his breath as the loading circle spun. The connection was active, but the real challenge was just beginning. Julian opened his video settings to try a virtual background.
He selected a clean, modern office template to hide the library wall. For a second, the screen showed him sitting in a beautiful sunlit, high-rise office. Then he moved his hand. The filter lagged immediately, swallowing his arm into a gray void. He leaned back, and half of his face vanished into the digital wallpaper. "Oh, come on," Julian whispered in frustration. His cheap, outdated laptop did not have enough processing power to run the filter smoothly. Every time he blinked, his ears glitched out, making him look like an alien. If he used this virtual background during the interview, he would look completely unprofessional. But if he turned it off, one wrong move would reveal the children's section behind him. He checked his watch. 30 minutes left. His forehead was damp with nervous sweat. Julian turned off the virtual background, choosing to show his real environment. He carefully adjusted his chair, centering his body perfectly in front of the narrow strip of beige wall. "No sudden movements," he warned himself. "Just keep your head perfectly still, look at the camera, and smile." He practiced speaking while keeping his shoulders completely frozen. He felt ridiculous, like a mannequin trying to sell website designs. But he had no other option. This pitch had to be perfect, glitch-free, and professional. He closed his eyes, took a deep, quiet breath, and waited for the clock to strike 1.
With 15 minutes left on the clock, Julian felt a sudden gust of wind. An elderly man in a faded green coat sat down at the table directly across from him. It was Mr. Henderson, a notorious library regular known for his daily routine and complete lack of volume control. Julian's heart began to race as Mr. Henderson unzipped a heavy canvas bag. With agonizing slowness, the old man pulled out a thermos and a tightly wrapped package of tinfoil. Crinkle, crinkle, crackle. The sound of the aluminum foil felt like firecrackers exploding next to Julian's microphone. Then came the smell, a powerful, unmistakable wave of heavy egg salad and onions. Julian checked his watch. It was 12:48 p.m. "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson," Julian whispered, leaning forward with his most polite, desperate smile. "I have a really important job interview on Zoom in 12 minutes. Could you please do me a huge favor?" Mr. Henderson blinked, looking confused, and shouted, "What's that? A what interview?" "A job interview," he hissed softly, waving his hands to lower the volume. "Just for 20 minutes. If you could please be a little quiet, it would save my life." Mr. Henderson smiled warmly, nodded vigorously, and gave Julian a big thumbs up. "Say no more, son. Total silence. Good luck," he boomed across the entire second floor. A nearby librarian glared at them and let out a sharp warning click with her tongue. Julian sank into his chair, praying that Mr. Henderson's version of silence was actually quiet. He opened the Zoom application and stared at the digital countdown. 5 minutes to go. The clock on the corner of Julian's screen changed to 1 p.m. His finger trembled slightly as he clicked the blue Join Meeting button. Instantly, the Zoom interface loaded and Victoria Vance's face appeared on his screen. She was sitting in a minimalist, sun-drenched corporate office with high ceilings and modern art. "Hello, Julian. Thanks for jumping on this call so quickly," Victoria said, her voice sharp and direct. Julian forced his shoulders to relax and put on his best, most confident business smile. "It is an absolute pleasure to meet you, Victoria," Julian replied, pitching his voice lower to sound more professional. "I have been looking forward to discussing how we can elevate your agency's online presence."
Right at that exact second, a loud, high-pitched screech echoed through the entire library. It was the overhead PA system warming up. Bzzz, click. "Attention, patrons!" a booming, digitized voice announced, echoing off the concrete walls. "The library will close early on Friday for an upcoming book sale." Julian's eyes went wide with pure panic. He lunged forward, his index finger slamming down on the keyboard shortcut to mute his microphone. He kept his eyes locked on the camera, holding a stiff, frozen grin as the announcement continued to blare through the speakers above him. On the screen, Victoria stopped talking, looking slightly confused by his sudden, intense smile. Julian nodded enthusiastically, pretending he was just deeply agreeing with her previous greeting. The speaker finally finished. "Thank you, and have a wonderful day." Click. Julian unmuted himself, hoping his microphone hadn't picked up the absolute disaster that had just unfolded. "My apologies, Victoria," Julian said smoothly, praying his voice didn't shake. "Please, go ahead."
"Great," Victoria said, adjusting her glasses. "Let's take a look at your latest web development portfolio. Can you share your screen?" Julian nodded, clicking the Share Screen button. "Of course," he said, opening his presentation. "As you can see, I focus on clean layouts and fast loading times." While Victoria stared at his shared screen, Julian heard a sudden, terrifying sound behind him. It was a chorus of high-pitched giggles and tiny stomping feet. The Toddler Storytime group had just arrived. A dozen young children, led by a librarian carrying a colorful picture book, sat down on the rug right behind Julian's desk. Julian kept his eyes glued to his presentation, explaining his coding structure as clearly as possible. Suddenly, a curious toddler in a bright yellow dinosaur t-shirt broke away from the group. The boy wandered straight toward Julian's desk, staring at the glowing laptop screen with wide eyes. If the child took 2 more steps, he would walk directly into Julian's camera view, ruining the illusion of a private, professional office. Julian couldn't move his upper body. Victoria was still watching him closely through his webcam. Acting quickly, Julian stretched his right leg under the table. He hooked his foot around his heavy backpack and gently slid it across the floor. He pushed the bag into the gap between his chair and the table, creating a soft, physical barrier. The toddler bumped into the backpack, looked down in confusion, and then happily wandered back to the story rug. Julian took a quiet, relieved breath and continued explaining his web design. "And that is how I optimize the user experience," Julian said, his heart beating wildly in his chest. "Our design strategy always focuses on—" Julian paused. The screen of his laptop suddenly dimmed. A bright red warning popped up in the top right corner. "Battery low, 8% remaining." Julian felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He had been so rushed leaving his apartment that he hadn't realized his laptop wasn't plugged in. He looked down at the floor near his feet. The library's wall outlet was old, metallic, and hanging slightly loose from the baseboard. He had his charger in his backpack, but how could he plug it in without Victoria noticing? "Julian, are you still there?" Victoria asked, noticing his sudden silence. "Yes, absolutely," Julian said, his brain working at lightning speed. "I just dropped my favorite pen. Let me grab it quickly." Julian intentionally nudged his pen off the table with his elbow. It clattered loudly to the floor. "1 second," Julian smiled, ducking his head beneath the level of the webcam. Under the dark desk, Julian scrambled. He grabbed his charger from his bag, his hands shaking.
He pushed the plug into the loose wall outlet, but it kept sliding right back out. "So, as I was saying," Julian called out from under the table, his voice muffled but trying to sound cheerful, "the key to a great user interface is flexibility." He held the plug in place with his thumb, pushing hard against the wall to keep the connection. The charging light on his laptop cord finally turned green. He popped back up into the camera frame, breathing heavily, but holding his pen. "Found it," he said, adjusting his glasses. Victoria stared at him, her expression a mix of confusion and mild amusement.
Julian adjusted his collar and tried to catch his breath. The charging icon showed his laptop was finally receiving power. "Now," Victoria said, leaning forward in her chair, "let's talk about your pricing for the development phase." Julian took a deep breath, preparing to pitch his standard rate. He pressed the spacebar to unmute himself. "For a project of this scale, my rate is—" Suddenly, a massive, deafening crash echoed right behind his desk. A nearby high school student had accidentally knocked a towering stack of heavy textbooks off a high shelf. The thick books slammed onto the hard tile floor like the series of small explosions. Julian froze, his mouth half open. Before he could say a word, an incredibly sharp, piercing sound cut through the air. "Shh!" It was the head librarian, Mrs. Gable, standing at the front desk. The hiss was so loud and long that it practically vibrated through Julian's laptop microphone. On the screen, Victoria stopped writing notes. She slowly raised her head and stared directly at her camera. One of her eyebrows crawled high up her forehead. "Julian," Victoria said slowly, her voice dripping with skepticism, "is there a giant snake in your office? Or is someone shushing you?" Julian's face burned a deep red. The illusion of his quiet professional workspace was completely shattered. He looked at the tiny green light of his microphone, realizing there was absolutely no way to explain this away.
Julian swallowed hard, his heart sinking into his stomach. He looked at Victoria's questioning face on the screen and knew the game was up. He couldn't lie anymore. "Actually, Victoria," Julian began, taking a deep, slow breath to steady his voice, "that wasn't a snake. I am currently sitting in the corner of our local public library." Victoria blinked, surprised by his sudden honesty. Julian continued, "My home internet was cut off this morning because I am behind on my bills. When I got your email, I knew this was the biggest opportunity of my career, and I simply couldn't let it slip away. So I ran 4 blocks to the library, set up next to the children's section, and tried my best to make this look like a quiet, private office." He shifted slightly to the side, finally letting the camera reveal a corner of the bright Toddler banner. "I am very sorry for not being entirely upfront with you about my environment, but I promise you my coding skills and my commitment to your project are 100% real." Julian braced himself, expecting her to politely end the call and look for another developer. Victoria was silent for a long, heavy moment, her face completely unreadable.
Victoria slowly closed the notebook on her desk. A tense, heavy silence stretched between them across the digital connection. Julian held his breath, waiting for the inevitable rejection. Then, Victoria's strict expression completely softened, and she let out a low chuckle. "Julian, in my line of work, I meet dozens of developers with expensive offices and fancy setups who can't deliver a project on time," she said. "What I don't see very often is this level of absolute resourcefulness, grit, and passion. You hid a toddler invasion, solved a power crisis under your desk, and kept presenting your code without missing a single beat." Julian blinked, stunned by her words. I don't care where you work, as long as the work is excellent, Victoria continued, smiling warmly. I am going to email you the contract right now, and I am approving a 50% upfront deposit. But I have one very strict condition for this partnership. Julian leaned forward. Anything, Victoria. What is it? Use that deposit to pay your internet bill this afternoon, she said, with a wink. I love your energy, but I don't think my nerves can handle another library meeting. Julian laughed, a massive wave of relief washing over his entire body. Deal, Julian said. Thank you so much, Victoria. As the call ended, Julian slowly closed his laptop screen and leaned back in his wooden chair. Across the table, Mr. Henderson gave him a silent, enthusiastic thumbs up. Julian smiled, packed his bag, and walked out into the sunshine, finally ready to build his real office.
What a fantastic ending for Julian! He showed us that real resourcefulness and honesty can go a long way, even when things feel completely out of control. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life English learning stories. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. Now, I have a question for you. Have you ever had to do an important meeting or phone call in a really strange or noisy place? Let me know your story in the comments below. I would love to read your experiences. Thank you so much for watching. Keep practicing your English, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.